클릭해주셔서 감사합니다.
Hello everyone, I'm Laiseo JK. Today we are beginning a special series about one of the most dramatic economic transformations in modern history, the rise of South Korea. Today, South Korea is known for Samsung, Hyundai, LG, SK Hynix, K-pop, Korean dramas, semiconductors, smartphones, cars, ships, cosmetics, online games, and advanced technology. But only a few generations ago, South Korea was extremely poor. In the 1950s, after the Korean War, the country was devastated. Cities were destroyed, factories were destroyed, roads and bridges were damaged, millions of people were displaced, families were separated, food was scarce, industrial capacity was extremely weak. South Korea was not expected to become a rich country. It had few natural resources. It had a small domestic market. It was surrounded by geopolitical danger. It depended heavily on foreign aid. And yet, within a few decades, South Korea became one of the world's major industrial economies. This transformation is often called the miracle on the Han River. But miracles do not happen without causes. So today, we are gonna ask, how did a country that was so poor in the 1950s become one of the most advanced economies in the world? To understand this, we must begin not with Samsung, Hyundai, or K-pop. We must begin with poverty, war, survival, foreign aid, education, land reform, state building, and the first steps toward economic restructuring. Let's begin. First, we need to understand how devastated Korea was after liberation and war. Korea was liberated from Japanese colonial rule in 1945, but liberation did not immediately create stability. The Korean peninsula was divided into north and south. Political conflict intensified. Institutions were unstable. The economy was divided. Industrial facilities were unevenly distributed. Then came the Korean War in 1950. The war destroyed much of the country. This is extremely important. When people today look at modern Seoul, they see skyscrapers, subways, highways, universities, global companies, and advanced technology. But in the 1950s, the situation was completely different. South Korea was fighting for survival. The question was not how can we become a global technology leader. The question was how can people eat? How can families survive? How can the government function? How can the country rebuild basic infrastructure? This is the starting point of Korea's economic story. Now let's discuss one of South Korea's first major advantages. Not oil, not gold, not natural gas. Human capital. Even when Korea was poor, Korean society had a strong desire for education. Education was seen as a path to survival, dignity, and social mobility. Parents sacrificed enormously to educate their children. This cultural emphasis on education became one of the foundations of Korea's later economic development. But education alone is not enough. A country also needs institutions, infrastructure, political direction, foreign exchange, technology, and industrial capacity. So we must look at the early economic conditions more carefully. After the war, South Korea depended heavily on foreign aid, especially from the United States. Foreign aid provided food, materials, and financial support. This aid helped South Korea survive during a period when domestic production was extremely weak. But foreign aid also created a problem. Aid can keep a country alive, but aid alone cannot make a country rich. If a nation depends permanently on aid, it remains vulnerable. So Korea eventually had to move from aid dependence to productive capacity. That shift is the heart of the miracle on the Han River. In the 1950s, South Korea's economy was still weak. Industry was limited. Exports were small. Domestic markets were poor. The government lacked resources. Infrastructure was underdeveloped. But beneath the surface, several foundations were being created. One of them was land reform. Land reform is extremely important in Korean economic history. Before modernization, land ownership was highly unequal. Many farmers did not own the land they worked on. Land reform distributed land and weakened the old landlord class. This had several effects. First, it reduced rural inequality. Second, it gave many farmers stronger incentives to work and invest. Third, it weakened traditional elite structures. Fourth, it helped create a broader base for social mobility. In many countries, extreme land inequality has blocked development. When a small elite controls land and wealth, ordinary people have fewer opportunities. Korea's land reform helped create a more equal starting point compared with many developing countries. This does not mean Korea became perfectly equal, but it did mean that the country avoided some of the worst patterns of rural aristocratic domination. Now let's discuss the role of the state. Economic development requires more than individual effort. It requires coordination. A developing country must decide where should limited resources go, which industries should be supported, how should infrastructure be built, how should foreign currency be earned, how should education be expanded, how should domestic companies grow. In the 1950s, South Korea did not yet have the powerful industrial strategy that would emerge later, but the state was becoming central to development. This would become much more important in the 1960s and 1970s. Now let's pause and compare Korea with other countries. Many poor countries after World War II received foreign aid. Many had young populations. Many wanted development. Many had national leaders promising modernization. But not all became rich. So what made Korea different? There was no single magic factor. Korea's development came from a combination of factors: education, land reform, foreign aid, and state capacity, export discipline, industrial policy, Cold War geopolitics, hard work, entrepreneurship, global market access, technology learning. The key is combination. No single factor explains everything. Now let's discuss foreign aid more deeply. In the 1950s, American aid was essential for South Korea. It helped stabilize the country. It provided food and raw materials. It supported government budgets. It prevented economic collapse. But aid has had limits. Aid can create dependence. Aid can reduce incentives for domestic production. Aid can support consumption rather than transformation. So South Korea's later success depended on moving beyond aid. The country had to learn how to produce, export, and compete. This is where the story becomes economic, not just historical. A poor country becomes rich when it increases productivity. Productivity means producing more value with the same amount of labor, land, capital, and time. In the beginning, Korea had cheap labor but low capital and weak technology. So the early development strategy had to begin with industries that used labor intensively. Textiles, clothing, simple manufactured goods. These industries may not sound glamorous, but they were crucial. Why? Because they allowed Korea to enter global markets. They created jobs. They generated foreign currency. They taught firms how to produce for export. They trained workers and managers. They built the foundation for more advanced industries later. This is one of the most important lessons in development economics. Countries rarely become rich by jumping immediately into the most advanced industries. They often climb step by step. First, simple manufacturing, then heavier industry, then technology-intensive production, then innovation and global brand. South Korea followed this pattern. Now let's discuss the psychological side of development. For a country emerging from war, economic development is not only about numbers. It is about national survival. South Korea was located next to North Korea, backed by the Soviet Union and China. The Cold War created enormous security pressure. This pressure shaped the South Korean state. Economic growth was not merely about comfort. It was tied to national survival, military strength, legitimacy, and international position. A weak economy meant vulnerability. A strong economy meant survival. This urgency became a powerful driver of development. Now let's move toward the early 1960s. The 1960s marked a major turning point. South Korea began to shift more seriously toward export-led industrialization. This means the country focused on producing goods for foreign markets. Why was this important? Because Korea's domestic market was too small and too poor. If Korean companies only sold to Korean consumers, growth would be limited. But if Korean firms sold to the world, the market became much larger. Export-led growth gave Korea access to global demand. It also forced Korean firms to compete internationally. This pressure was painful but productive. A company that exports must meet global standards. It must improve quality. It must reduce costs. It must deliver on time. It must learn foreign markets. Export competition became a training ground for Korean industry. Now let's discuss foreign currency. Poor countries often face a shortage of foreign exchange. They need foreign currency to import machines, oil, raw materials, technology, industrial equipment. Exports solved this problem. By selling goods abroad, Korea earned the foreign currency needed to buy the machines and materials required for further industrialization. This created a growth cycle. Export more, earn foreign currency, import machines, build factories, produce more, export more again. This cycle became central to Korea's development. Now let's discuss the government's role in export promotion. The Korean state did not simply wait for markets to develop naturally. It actively pushed companies to export. The government set targets, provided financing, supported selected industries, monitored performance, rewarded successful exporters, pressured underperforming firms. This was not pure free market capitalism. It was not Soviet-style central planning either. It was a developmental state model. Markets existed. Private companies existed. Profit incentives existed. But the state strongly guided development. This hybrid model became one of the defining features of East Asian development. Now let's explain the developmental state more clearly. A developmental state is a government that actively organizes national economic development. It does not simply regulate the economy from a distance. It tries to transform the structure of the economy. It asks which industries should grow. How can exports expand? How can domestic firms become globally competitive? How can the country move from simple production to advanced technology? South Korea's government played this role strongly, but developmental states can succeed or fail. They require discipline. If the government supports companies without demanding results, resources may be wasted. But if support is linked to performance, especially export performance, companies are forced to improve. This was one reason Korea's model worked relatively well. Now let's discuss chaebols. Korea's large business groups became crucial to industrialization. Companies like Samsung, Hyundai, LG, and SK did not become global giants overnight. They grew through decades of state support, export competition, risk-taking, and aggressive expansion. Chaebols would mobilize capital, labor, and management at large scale. This allowed Korea to enter industries that required massive investment: shipbuilding, automobiles, steel, electronics, semiconductors. But chaebols also created problems: economic concentration, political influence, family control, market dominance, inequality. So Korea's growth model had both strengths and weaknesses from the beginning. Now let's discuss labor. Korea's miracle was built partly on the labor of ordinary people. Factory workers worked long hours under difficult conditions. Families sacrificed for education. Rural migrants moved to cities. Women workers played a major role in early export industries. Young people entered factories that produced textiles, garments, electronics, and other goods. Economic development was not only a story of presidents, policies, and companies. It was also the story of millions of ordinary people working under pressure. This is important because the phrase miracle on the Han River can sound too clean, but development was hard. It involved sacrifice, it involved inequality, it involved labor struggles, it involved social pain. The miracle was real, but it was not painless. Now let's discuss infrastructure. Factories cannot function without infrastructure. Korea needed roads, ports, electricity, water systems, telecommunications, industrial zones. Infrastructure reduces transaction costs. It makes production and trade faster and cheaper. If a factory produces goods but cannot transport them efficiently, the economy cannot grow effectively. Korea invested heavily in infrastructure, especially as industrialization advanced. This created the physical foundation for growth. Now let's discuss the shift from light industry to heavy industry. In the early stage, Korea exported labor-intensive goods, but the government wanted to move beyond low-wage production. In the 1970s, Korea pushed heavy and chemical industries, steel, shipbuilding, petrochemicals, machinery, automobiles. This was risky. Heavy industries require enormous capital. They require technology. They require skilled labor. They require large-scale coordination. But if successful, they create much higher value than simple manufacturing. Korea's move into heavy industry helped lay the foundation for later technological power. Now let's discuss post-coal. The steel industry was essential for industrialization. Steel is needed for buildings, ships, cars, machines, infrastructure. Korea's steel development became central to the country's industrialization. Without steel, shipbuilding and automobiles would be much harder to develop. This shows how industries are connected. Economic development is not just about one company or one product. It is about building an industrial ecosystem. Now let's discuss Hyundai. Hyundai became a symbol of Korea's industrial ambition. Construction, shipbuilding, automobiles. Hyundai showed how Korean firms entered industries that many people thought were too advanced for a poor country. Shipbuilding is a perfect example. To build ships, a country needs engineering, steel, skilled labor, ports, financing, and global customers. Korea became one of the world's leading shipbuilding nations. This was not accidental. It required long-term industrial strategy and relentless execution. Now let's discuss Samsung. Samsung's transformation is also extraordinary. Samsung moved from trading and basic manufacturing into electronics and eventually semiconductors. Semiconductors are among the most complex and strategically important industries in the world. They require massive capital investment, advanced engineering, precision manufacturing, global supply chains, continuous technological upgrading. Korea's rise in semiconductors shows how a country can move from imitation to innovation. At first, late developing countries often learn from advanced economies. They import technology, they imitate, they improve, they produce more cheaply, then eventually they innovate. This process is called catching up. South Korea became one of the most successful catching up economies in modern history. Now let's discuss the role of Japan. Japan influenced Korea's development in complicated ways. Japan had colonized Korea, causing enormous historical suffering. But after liberation and especially later in the development period, Korea also learned from Japanese industrial models. Japanese technology, capital goods, management practices, and regional production networks influenced Korea. Korea also competed with Japan in industries such as electronics, cars, and shipbuilding. This relationship was historically painful, economically important, and strategically complex. Now let's discuss the United States again. The United States played a major role in Korea's security and economic environment. American military protection allowed South Korea to focus more resources on development than would otherwise have been possible. American markets also mattered. Access to global markets, especially the US market, helped export-led growth. Cold War geopolitics created conditions that supported Korea's integration into the Western economic order. Now let's discuss the 1980s. By the 1980s, South Korea was no longer just a poor developing country. It had become a major industrializing economy. Exports were growing, manufacturing was advancing, urbanization was accelerating, education levels were rising, but society was also changing politically. Workers demanded better wages, citizens demanded democracy, the middle class expanded. Economic growth helped create social forces that demanded political change. This is another important lesson. Economic development changes society. It creates new classes, new expectations, new conflicts, and new political demands. Now let's discuss democratization. South Korea democratized in the late 1980s. Economic development and political change interacted deeply. As people became more educated and economically secure, demands for political rights increased. Democracy did not appear automatically because of growth, but growth helped create social conditions that supported democratization. This shows that economics and politics are deeply connected. Now let's discuss the 1997 Asian financial crisis. Korea's development story was not a smooth upward line. In 1997, South Korea faced a severe financial crisis. Companies were over-leveraged, financial systems were vulnerable, foreign capital suddenly withdrew. The country needed an IMF rescue package. This was a traumatic moment. Many Koreans remember the gold collecting campaign, where ordinary citizens donated gold to help the country overcome the crisis. The crisis exposed weaknesses in Korea's economic model: corporate debt, chaebol structure, financial fragility, overexpansion. But Korea also restructured and recovered. This crisis became another turning point. Now let's discuss the post-crisis economy. After 1997, Korea became more globally integrated and more financially disciplined in some ways. But the crisis also increased insecurity. Labor markets became more flexible. Job stability weakened. Inequality concerns increased. Competition intensified. Modern Korea's economic anxiety partly comes from this period. The country became more advanced but also more stressful. Now let's discuss the 2000s and 2010s. Korea became a high-tech economy. Broadband internet expanded rapidly. Korean electronics became globally competitive. Samsung became a global technology leader. Hyundai and Kia became major automobile brands. Korean shipbuilding remained globally important. Korean culture began spreading internationally. This is where economic power and cultural power began reinforcing each other. A country with advanced technology, media industries, and global brands can influence the world far beyond its population size. Now let's discuss K-pop and cultural exports. K-pop is not separate from economics. It reflects entertainment investment, training systems, digital platforms, global marketing, soft power, brand strategy. Korean dramas, films, music, and games became part of Korea's global economic identity. This shows that modern economic development is not only about factories, it is also about culture, creativity, and intellectual property. Now let's discuss the deeper economic concept. Korea became rich because it climbed the value chain. At first, Korea produced simple goods using cheap labor. Then it produced more complex manufactured goods. Then it developed heavy industry. Then electronics. Then semiconductors, software, entertainment, biotechnology, and advanced services. This movement from low-value production to high-value production is the essence of development. The goal is not merely to work harder. The goal is to produce more value per hour of labor. That is productivity growth. Now let's compare Korea with countries that did not develop as successfully. Some countries had more natural resources than Korea. Some had larger land areas. Some had larger populations. Some had more oil or minerals. But resources alone did not guarantee success. Without effective institutions, education, infrastructure, political stability, and industrial upgrading, resources can be wasted. Korea's story shows that human capital and productivity can matter more than natural resources. Now let's discuss the dark side of the miracle. The Korean miracle created wealth, but also pressure. Education competition became intense. Work culture became demanding. Housing prices became severe. Youth employment became difficult. Fertility collapsed. Mental health concerns increased. Regional inequality remains significant. This is extremely important. Economic development solves some problems but creates new ones. In the 1950s, the problem was survival. Today, many Koreans face different problems. How can young people afford housing? How can families raise children? How can workers avoid burnout? How can society reduce inequality? How can Korea sustain growth in an aging society? The miracle changed the question, but it did not end all problems. Now let's discuss the low birth rate. Korea's low birth rate is one of the biggest challenges for the future. An aging population can reduce the labor force. It can increase pension burdens. It can slow economic growth. It can increase pressure on younger generations. This shows that economic success must be socially sustainable. A country can become rich but still face serious demographic problems. Now let's discuss innovation and the future. Korea's future growth cannot depend only on old industrial strategies. The country now needs continued innovation in AI, semiconductors, batteries, biotechnology, green technology, robotics, software, creative industries. Advanced economies cannot grow forever simply by copying others. They must create new technologies, new systems, and new industries. This is Korea's next challenge. Now let's return to the original question. How did Korea become rich? The answer is not one thing. It was not only culture, not only government, not only education, not only America, not only jabbers, not only experts. It was the combination. World devastation created urgency. Foreign aid helped survival. Land reform helped social mobility. Education built human capital. Government policy guided industrialization. Exports forced global competitiveness. Jabbers scaled production. Workers sacrificed. Infrastructure supported growth. Technology allowed upgrading. Global markets created opportunity. Korea's miracle was a system, a complex, painful, powerful system. Now let's think about what other countries can learn from Korea. Can every country copy Korea exactly? No. Every country has different story, geography, politics, culture, and global conditions. But Korea teaches several general lessons. First, education matters. Second, productivity matters. Third, institutions matter. Fourth, exports can accelerate development. Fifth, industrial upgrading is essential. Sixth, government policy can help when it is disciplined and performance oriented. Seventh, growth must eventually become more inclusive and sustainable. Now let's think philosophically. Korea's story is inspiring, but it is also sobering. It shows what humans can build in only a few generations, but it also shows the cost of rapid development. A country can become rich and still struggle with anxiety, inequality, competition, and demographic crisis. Therefore, the next question is not only how can Korea become richer, the deeper question is how can Korea become better? A mature economy must ask not only about GDP, exports, and technology, but also about quality of life, fairness, freedom, creativity, family, community, and happiness. Now here is one final important idea. The miracle on the Han River was not magic. It was history, policy, labor, education, sacrifice, global opportunity, and industrial transformation. It was an economic miracle because the transformation was so dramatic. But it was also a human story. The story of parents sacrificing for children, workers building factories, students studying late into the night, engineers learning foreign technology, entrepreneurs taking risks, a society struggling to survive, than competing to succeed. South Korea's rise reminds us that economic development is not abstract. It changes real lives, it transforms villages into cities, poverty into opportunity, factories into global brands, local culture into global influence. And sometimes, within only a few generations, it can transform the destiny of an entire nation. So let's summarize today's lecture. In the 1950s, South Korea was devastated by war and poverty. It survived partly through foreign aid, but aid alone did not make Korea rich. Korea became wealthy through education, land reform, state-led development, export-driven industrialization, infrastructure investment, travel expansion, technological upgrading, and rising productivity. The country moved from simple manufacturing to heavy industry, then to advanced technology and global cultural influence. But the Korean miracle also created new challenges involving inequality, housing, education pressure, work stress, and low birth rates. Ultimately, South Korea's rise shows both the power and the cost of rapid economic development. It is one of the greatest examples of how economics can transform a society. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this lecture, please like and subscribe. See you next time.